Today, we're going to be building an engine for what I think is one of the coolest off-road recovery vehicles that I've ever seen. A little bit earlier this summer, Matt from Matt's Off-Road Recovery reached out, and he said he needed an engine built for his spud truck. Now, the premise is simple. It's an old Chevy C60 that he's added 3 axles underneath. It's going to be 6-wheel drive. It has a ramp truck body on the back, or a rollback, or whatever you guys want to call it. And he's primarily going to use it recovering side-by-sides, ATVs, dirt bikes, razors, and golf carts, and who knows what else out in the sand dunes or wherever they have been incapacitated. Now, he's got 6 wheels, he's got a lot of weight, and especially when you have the thing loaded down, he wanted to have enough power to be able to have fun, I guess. But that got my attention. A powerful engine for a unique truck, I was all on board. So he wanted to have it based off of the Chevy LS platform. He sent me over an LQ9 6-liter engine, 100% complete. But after a little bit of back and forth, we kind of decided that we wanted to build a 408 cubic inch stroker, but that's not all. On top of it, we were going to add an LSA supercharger. So over the past 6 weeks or so, I have got the credit card out. We've got a whole bunch of parts that have arrived. So today, a 408 cubic inch LSA stroker is exactly what we're going to build. So we got the block from the machine shop last week, and they actually did quite a bit of work to it. As you can see, I've got a coat of paint on here already, just because I figured with the block being perfectly clean out of the hot tank, this is like the perfect time to do it. But the important stuff, paint is just, you know, shiny. We got a 10 thousandths overbore. They did a torque plate hone on this thing, so while the cylinder heads are bolted on, the cylinders will be nice and round. We decked it to 0 clearance with the piston and rod combo that we have down there. They also balanced the rotating assembly for us, and they line honed it and installed new cam bearings. So basically, we have a block that is 100% ready to go. And I think this would fall under the balanced and blueprinted, kind of the old school terminology of what we're doing. Anyway, as far as rotating assembly goes, we needed something that was strong, that's going to hold up to, of course, the power of the supercharged engine and the rigors of what Matt's going to be putting this thing through. So here's what we got. We got ourselves a Summit Pro LS forged steel 4-inch stroke crankshaft with the 24X reluctor wheel for Gen 3 LS electronics. And it has the keyway for the balancer, so we're not going to slip the balancer on there. By the way, we are going to be running this LSA balancer that has the 8-rib drive, again, for maximum grippiness. That's the keyway that'll match with the crankshaft. Anyhow, we've got a Cali's Comstar connecting rod, 6125 length, center to center. And then on top of that, we are going to have H-beam. I don't know if I mentioned that. And then we have a MAHLE POWERPAK piston with a 24cc dish. And the reason why we have such a big dish on there is because we want to have a fairly conservative compression ratio just to minimize any risk of spark knocker detonation when Matt's using this thing, you know, with heavy throttle, heavy weight out in the dunes. So I wanted to target, at first I figured 9.5, but then I figured just to be extra safe, let's go 9.0 to 1. And that's exactly what we're going to get. I'll put a sheet up on the screen that shows the compression ratio calculations that I did. But this is basically the rotating assembly. The machine shop did get everything balanced, and they labeled it so we know which rod goes where and stuff like that. So let's jump right in and start the assembly. The very first thing that we're going to do, we're going to put the main caps in with the bearings. We're going to torque it, and then I'll take a bunch of measurements on the rod and the main journals, and then we'll get some measurements in the block just so we know we have proper oil clearance for this engine. So I'm hoping that we don't have to order any other bearings. Kind of got a tight deadline for this thing I've put on myself. And if they are too tight, then we can order an X bearing that has a little bit more room. These are a standard bearing. You can see by the little STD on there. And one of the reasons why we had to do the line hone in the first place is because we're using these ARP main studs. They provide a little bit more clamping force to hold the main cap into the block, which distorts this a little bit over the stock bolts. So they line hone it to restore the geometry of this. Fun fact of the day. So I don't care if we're building a Briggs & Stratton or a full-blown race motor. One thing I'm always going to do is measure the bearing clearances, because it'll help us identify any potential future problems. There's a certain amount of clearance that we want between the journal and the bearing. In this case, it's like a minimum of 2.5 thousandths of an inch. And we start by measuring the journals. This one is 2.55, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 5, 2.5585 inches. All right, 2.55, that'll be number 4 right here. So now we get to zero this thing out to the exact dimension of the crank journal. That was lucky, James. That's 0 right there. Okay, now let's measure clearance. So that guy there takes a very precise measurement of the diameter. Uh-oh. That's not what we want, James. Look at this. See, that goes down. We want 2.5. That goes down to like 1.9. So we need some X bearings, I think. Yeah, it's like 1.8, 1.9. That's not enough clearance. That's going to be too tight. Yeah, same story on this one. It's only 17. All right, let me order some new bearings. All right, so we better do the same thing on the rod journals. That way we only have to place one order if these are going to be a different size as well. Six on the money. 0986. Now we'll set our dial bore gauge for that, which I gotta change the anvil, I believe. So for the rod bearing oil clearance, we're shooting for 2 thousandths of an inch. So because it's a smaller journal, we need smaller clearance than we had with the main. So 2 thousandths is what we are shooting for. What do we have? Is that too much? 32 10,000ths. Where's my pen? Now, the differences in dimensions that we're talking about here are like fractions of a human hair. But, as good buddy Reacher says,
details matter.
Details matter. And I promise I'll stop using that clip, but it just hammers home the point. So here's what we're looking at. We have a goal for vertical oil clearance of 2.5 thousandths of an inch on the mains and 2 thousandths of an inch on the rods. But as we measured, we have 18 10,000ths or 1.8 thousandths on the first one, 1.7 thousandths on the second main journal, which is too tight. So to fix that, all we got to do is add STDX to the end of the part number, and we get those guys in the Summit shopping cart right there. So we'll get those on the way. And then for the rod bearings, we got 32 ten thousandths or 3.25 thousandths, which is too loose. So I got to add 001 to the end of the bearing part number there. Boom, we got some in the shopping cart. So we'll get this stuff overnighted from Summit and on the way. And hopefully that will get us exactly where we need to be for the vertical oil clearance. All right, so this is gonna be the fun part. We gotta get the pistons and rods fitted together, and of course there's an orientation everything belongs in. There's a big chamfer on one side of the rod, a flat part on the other. Chamfer goes towards the counterweight, which for the 1357 side of the engine, passenger side, is the front. Then of course the pistons, they have a valve relief that goes up towards the center of the engine, so we just gotta make sure we keep everything oriented, you know, how it needs to be. So, use these little circlips on the MAHLE pistons, which they can be a little bit fiddly to work with. So let's jump right in. All right, chamfer to the front, valve relief up. All right, first one done. And when you're building a motor for a specific application, I mean, I guess every engine has a specific application, but you got to order parts based on how they're going to be used. And the pistons are a very important part of a forced induction engine because they see a ton of abuse. So I did choose the MAHLE POWERPAK pistons for a couple reasons. Number one, they're available in all the right sizes. We could get them in only the 10 thousandths over bore instead of the 20 or 30 thousandths over. They have the right dish. They're made from forged aluminum, so they're very strong. They have a hard anodized top ring groove, which will help for longevity. So basically, this is kind of like the ideal piston for what we're trying to do. It's lightweight, it's strong, and it's robust, and it's gonna last a very long time. So check them out. I'll put a link down below for you to check them out, along with all these parts that we're using here. Yeah, if you're building an LS or an LT or really any engine, just check out the MAHLE POWERPAK because they probably have what you need. Just do that to kind of square up the ring and the bore. Could go a little longer or a little further, but almost. There we go. You want to know something, James? What? We had a viewer on our video last week, or the week before maybe, who was disappointed in the work that we were doing because my hands weren't dirty enough. Figure that one out. Set the gap, set the oil ring, start with a support rail. Yeah, every one of these rings has an orientation that it's supposed to go in. There's a top and a bottom, and you're supposed to clock it a certain way as well. This first guy is an oil support rail, and its only job is to hold up the oil ring, basically, because it has these cutouts on the side where the wrist pin goes through. So it just kind of sits at the bottom and reinforces it a little. Top oil ring goes over here. The gap for the second compression ring goes here, and there's a little mark, that guy right there, that shows up. Same thing, top ring has a mark. They put yellow paint on the tops, blue on the bottoms. So there we go, one fully assembled, ready to accept a bearing, piston, and rod combination. Ready for supercharged LS. It is now the very next day, and we have all of the gaps set on all of the rings. We have the rings installed onto the pistons, pistons attached to the rods. Basically, everything is ready to be assembled, only if our bearing clearance is now correct. Thankfully, our overnight order of bearings from Summit just showed up, so now all we really got to do is we'll get the bearings loaded up in the block and the caps. We'll get the caps installed and torqued, and I have the dial bore gauge already sized again for the mains because we did rods last. We'll check all of our oil clearance, and if everything checks out, then we put this thing together for good. All right, so the rule of thumb is 1/1000th of clearance per inch of shaft diameter, plus an extra 5/10,000ths for high performance applications if you choose. So that means basically we are shooting 2.5 to 3 thousandths. So let's see what we got. And we are right on the money with 3/1000ths of an inch. Another 3 right on the money. All right, we'll get all the mains sorted out. Now on to the rods. Woo-wee, we are in business. 24/10,000ths. So just a little while later, we have all of our bearing clearances set exactly where we want them. And yeah, it did take an extra day to get the second set of bearings, and it did take 2 bearing sets to actually put the clearances where we wanted them. But it is well worth the extra effort, the time and expense to get your bearing clearances set up where you want or where they need to be, because an engine with proper bearing clearance, well, that's the difference between something that lasts a long time or something that chews itself up in short order, which we obviously don't want. So that's my little soapbox for the day. Take the time, do it right, make it right, even if it takes another day and another couple $100 in bearings. But anyway, so we are now at the point where we can start to assemble this stuff pretty much for good. The only last measurement that we need to take is on the crankshaft, and that's going to be for the thrust or the end play, which is more or less controlled by the thrust bearing, which is here. It has a thrust surface on the front and back and the cap as well. So we will start by getting the crankshaft thrown in the block. We'll just tighten up the center cap, we'll check the thrust, and then if everything checks out, everything goes in for good. All right, so thrust clearance was just a teeny tiny on the tight side. Came in at 3/1000ths of an inch. I'd like it to be 4 to 5, somewhere in there. So we're gonna just take this fine grit sandpaper, a little bit of oil on there, just very lightly scuff the thrust surfaces only, and hopefully that'll get us what we're after. Seven, 8, 9, 10, 11, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All right, guys, look what just showed up. Get some valve train. Talk more about that later. All right, that's like 4.5 of end play, which is the base bearing. We'll do the same thing to the cap, and we'll check it with the cap torqued, but off to a good start. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All right, Chris, how much thrust we got?
5.
I like it. All right, the crankshaft is 1000% in its home, so now we just got to get these pistons jammed in the block. Got a little bit of motor oil in this guy here. Let's put a little bit on the rings like so. Make sure everything is still lined up where we had it. Get our super fancy high-end ring compressor. And a little bit of sauce on the rod bearings. And what you're going to want to do is grab your biggest hammer and bash these things in. All right, all the pistons and rods are in. We just got to torque the rod bolts. We'll do it in like 3 passes, 25, 50, and then 72, I think is the final spec. And these do have ultra torque on them, of course. A little spinnerooski. James, how much horsepower do you think this thing will make?
30.
30? 30?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
30 pounds, 40 pounds.
Oh, no, I mean, how much horsepower do you think the engine will make when it's running?
Probably 400.
400, all right. I hope it makes at least that.
Sounds good. 400 pounds.
I was hoping for like 600.
With the supercharger?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. 625.
625.
How about that?
I like it. Oops, sorry. So believe it or not, this is actually a factory camshaft that we're going to be installing. Now, it's not the factory LQ9 cam that would have come in this engine. It's not a factory LS3 cam. It's not even an LSA cam. In fact, this is the biggest factory cam that GM ever put in to any of the LS engines. This is from the C6 ZR1 Corvette or the LS9 engine. If you're into specs and stuff like that, this guy measures in at 211 degrees duration on intake at 50 thousandths lift, 230 on the exhaust side. It has a max lift of 550 thousandths. And at first you might think, well, those numbers aren't that big, especially for a 408 cubic inch engine. You should have gone with a bigger camshaft. I can kind of read the comments now. But remember, everything that we're doing here is for a purpose. We could have gone with a much larger camshaft and made a whole lot more horsepower, but also what would have happened is that would have raised the operating range of this engine. So instead of making peak torque at say 4,500 or 5,000 RPM, it might have made it at 55 or 6,500 RPM, depending again on the camshaft that we chose. So I'm confident for the purposes that we have here for what we want this engine to do. This is a great camshaft, and it was designed to work with a positive displacement supercharger in the ZR1 Corvette, which is exactly what we're going to be doing here. Not with the LS9 blower, but with the LSA blower. Same thing though, sort of. Cool thing about this timing set is it actually has a thrust bearing instead of just a washer. And it's a double row unlike the stock LS engines, which just have a single row. So again, just a little more robust, a little more durable. All right, so the next thing we got to do is get the lifters in, but I'm letting those soak in oil just for a little bit, so I need to get the heads ready to go on. Earlier I mentioned how these are the rectangular port. This is the same sort of port shape that like the LS3 car, you know, whether it's a Camaro or a Corvette has, and the L92 6.2 truck motor, but these heads are actually from a LSA, which is like the CTSV or the ZR1. And the reason why I chose these heads is obviously because we're putting an LSA blower on top, but also because they're made from a stronger alloy than most of the other castings. And if you believe what you can read on the internet, they actually have a little bit thicker deck surface, which will help kind of some of the sealing. So these are ready to bolt on out of the box, except they're not, because we do have a valve spring upgrade. The LS9 cam that we're running has more lift than the LSA cam did, so the stock springs won't work. So I've got that head is actually already done. This head I have not done yet, and I have like the world's jankiest valve spring compressor from our favorite inexpensive retail tool store. But it worked on one head. It might just last long enough to do the second head. So we'll get the valve spring swapped over, get these heads on the engine. Magnet, that's the way we do this. So much easier. Oop. Thank you, sir. New spring in the box. Newer spring on the head. A little bit of sticky goo on there. All right, so I did this before I started on the other cylinder head, but I figured I'd just show you guys. I'm just checking the installed height. So I got this little valve height micrometer. Oh, going the wrong way. And basically we got the keepers and retainer on there. We just twist it until it kind of comes up tight. Is 1905, but that's to the top here, so I've got to take this thing back out like so. Pull the keepers out. So we said 1905, right, James? 1905, which is there. And then the measure should be about 1.800. Right on the money. Cometic MLS head gasket. I think I spec'd them out with a 40 thousandths of an inch compressed thickness. Yep, 40 thousandths thickness. Says front, so we should put that towards the front, I guess.
In and out single petty is nice for
Yeah.
cheese board. Like 389 or something like that.
389. I will say, anytime we go in and out, it is inexpensive, but
Yeah, another thing.
Whataburger's way better.
Always.
me now, James. You're the boss, you tell me.
I don't know.
You don't know? Oh.
Tell me.
I'll tell you. The next step that we have to do is, we don't have to do this. I choose to do it. We're going to degree the cam, or I should say we're going to measure the intake center line of the camshaft just to verify that it is installed where I want it. To do that though, we have to have the valve train in. And as you may or may not know, the LSA, LS3, and L92 have different rocker arms from what this engine would have had. So you can see this is an offset exhaust rocker, how it kind of goes off to the side, where an intake rocker here, they're right down the middle. These I believe are, it's a Summit Racing, what's the number? It's just a rocker arm kit basically, but it already has the roller trunnions installed. So this is an all new rocker setup that's ready to go. And then also different between the LSA or the LS3 style heads is the rocker stand. So we grabbed one of those from Summit as well. All right, so now we know where our peak lift. Hey, we just can't get a break with the noise. All right, so now we know where the peak lift is. We need to figure out the degree of the crankshaft at 50 thousandths before peak lift and 50 thousandths after peak lift. So I'm gonna go backwards. So there's 50, but I'm gonna go a little bit beyond. And then I'm gonna go clockwise, so it's the direction of rotation of the engine. And I get to stop at exactly 50. So there's 55, 4, 3, 2, 1, 50. Okay. That is 91 to like 92 and a half. So 92 and a half degrees. We'll roll the engine through. There's peak lift. And then we'll go 50 thou after. Oops, slow down. Okay, 50 thousandths after. That's 150, 152. 52 degrees. So then we just find the average of those. Come on. It's 122.25 degrees. And get this. The stock LS9 camshaft intake center line is rated 122 and a half. So that means we are only a quarter of a degree away from where this camshaft normally would be installed from the factory. Now, I say this every time. We could actually decide to advance or retard the cam timing to suit our power band. We could advance it a little bit to make more low end torque. We could retard it a little bit to make more high RPM power. But with this cam installed at the 122.5 intake center line with an engine of this cubic inch and with our supercharger, I think we're going to be just fine. So that's just a good verification step that I'm glad we took. Now, the stock windage tray will not clear the throw of the new crankshaft, so we're installing this one. Got it from Summit. It's going to clear up to a 4-inch stroke crank, which is exactly what we have. And it fits beautifully. It should clear the stock oil pan, but let's double check. It does not. All right, just a little bit of work with the die grinder later. We've got it fitting. We just had to open up this guy here, which is where the oil filter boss thingy sits inside the pan. That guy there. And then we just had to make these two little notches here because the pan is really close. Pretty neat product here too. They've got these little notches that clear the connecting rod bolts on that side and that side. So pretty well engineered. Check it out, Summit Racing. It's supposed to fit the Gen 4 LSs. I think that's why I had to do a little bit of clearance. I don't know if they make one for the Gen 3 pan or not, but anyway, it's on. And it wouldn't be a proper project unless we got the welder out at least once. Because we went with the double row timing chain, which is thicker, it spaces the oil pump forward, we're just having to redo these mounts right here for the oil pickup tube. Already got everything adjusted, verified that the height is correct because these studs and nuts are a little bit taller than stock anyway. So all I'm gonna do is just weld the little bracket here and weld that little bracket right there. Then we put the oil pan on and be done with the bottom end. And just like that, we have ourselves a 404 cubic inch LS-based stroker that hopefully is going to hold up to anything that Matt and the crew can throw at it. Now, when we're all done with this thing with an LSA supercharger sitting on top, we have a goal of somewhere around 600 to 650 horsepower at the crankshaft, which I think is totally doable. With the parts that we put together, this thing should have a silky smooth idle. It should make a ton of mid RPM torque, and it should be fairly reliable as well. Now, the only thing left to finish up on this guy is the valve train. I think I already showed you guys the rocker arms and stuff like that, but push rods, we do have to get a set on the way. Now, in the LS world, everyone just says, throw in some 7400 push rods and send it, which in some cases will work. But in this case, we had the deck of the block milled, and we have an aftermarket rocker stand. We have aftermarket rockers. So it's always a good idea to take some measurements. Now, I've got this adjustable push rod length checker, and the zero lash length is 7.300 of an inch. And then the manufacturer of the lifters that we have in the block recommends an additional 45 to 90 thousandths of an inch. So somewhere right in the middle of that range would put our push rod length at 7.360 of an inch. So I'll get a set on the way and put that together just whenever. But like I said, for the most part, this engine is done. The plan from here on out, I think I mentioned this in my last video. Whenever we have a date, Matt and I got to get together and figure out what works for both of our schedules. I'm going to load up. We're going to head to Sand Hollow, Utah, technically Hurricane, I think. And we're going to get this thing installed in the spud truck. I'm going to help them finish up a few last things on the engine, you know, plumbing, wiring, maybe stuff like that. And then we're going to fire it up, which I am really excited for because, I mean, it's an engine. I like engines. But anyway, guys, hang tight because I don't know when that's going to happen. It could be a couple of weeks, it could be a month, but don't worry, you will see this engine on this channel running at some point. So I just want to say thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the people that came over from Matt's channel. Thank you to my viewers that always come by. I really appreciate all you guys. So come back soon for more cool content. And a quick PS because I couldn't leave you guys hanging. I came in on Saturday morning and just had to mock up the blower, the water pump and stuff like that. I am really, really pumped, guys. So there you go. There's the finished product of what Matt's off-road 408 stroker LSA supercharged LS is gonna look like, or does look like, because there it is.